You're listening to End Credits, episode 101, recorded June 15th, 2014. Welcome to End Credits. I'm Corey Tibbetts.
And I'm Miles Rourke.
And this is the podcast that talks to people working behind the scenes in the entertainment industry. Yep. And this week we have a video game legend. He's right up there with Doug TenNapel as far as us fanboying. But we have Lorne Lanning, who is the creator of the Oddworld, Abe's Oddysee, Abe's Exoddus, The Stranger, all of that great content that just started off that whole revolution in the 90s of actually telling stories with video games.
Yeah.
So it was very exciting to have him on. I'll warn you now, this is a very long conversation. We were joking around with him before we started recording that we've occasionally had a guest go 2 hours and had to break it into two. But this conversation just flows right through, so we couldn't break this up. So be prepared for a 2-hour conversation with Lorne Lanning. All right, well, we are talking with Lorne Lanning, who is really a legend in video games and very much an idol of mine growing up in the 90s. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great, and my condolences on that, Corey. But thanks for the kind words.
I'll try and keep him from gushing too much.
No, thanks for the kind words. It's great here to be with you guys.
Yeah, well, point of fact is, during the 90s, there were two video games that really caught my attention and just I kept coming back to, and that was Oddworld and The Neverhood. Both.
Yeah. Douglas TenNapel's games.
Yeah, just both because it was very new to have cinematic video games. The only other one at the time was Final Fantasy VII. You know, we didn't have cinematics in games like those games brought.
And boy, did they bring some budget to theirs, huh? Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when we started making games, we hadn't yet built games. So this was Abe's Oddysee was my first game. And so as a gamer, I was thinking, well, this is, what do I want to see more of? And as a computer graphics artist, which I had become, so originally I was a photorealist painter. That's how I was trained at School of Visual Arts in New York. And then I wanted to get into films, and I got into visual effects. That quickly led to 3D computer animation, going back to school at Cal Arts, studying animation. And then trying to figure out how computer graphics and entertainment really marry. And this was back when the only CG you were seeing was, for logos on the Olympics, occasionally in a movie, and often in just TV commercials. That's what was really happening. Yeah. So even 3D wasn't in games yet, right? So when games started going 3D, we just saw that opportunity to be like, wow, how do we bring what we really do to this medium? And I think, TenNapel, Doug came from Saturday Morning, right? Yeah. And games as well. So I think he was thinking in a similar way. And even in an additionally similar way, although I think, from different platforms, we both kind of had something to say. Mine was more from, I think, I can only really speak for myself, so not even say more from. But mine was, I felt like as an artist, your creations, I always looked at it more like music. So as an artist, your creations are sort of, expressions. The most interesting art is expressions of what the sort of artist is interpreting of the world around them, right? Not just stylistically, but in terms of deeper meaning. And so that was an issue for me, and that reflects in Abe's Oddysee, the third world factory worker, facing genocide as the next Soylent Green, and sort of, some global policy sort of reflections there for myself. And I think for TenNapel, it actually had more of, in his case, I think more of a religious theme. And maybe religion's a bad word, but I think it was reflecting more of his spiritual perceptions. Yeah. And so in a sense, I think those products were very different for that time because really wasn't what game making was about, right? Game making was just about making great challenge and cool characters and letting people have fun. But looking at music, looking at television, looking at film, looking at theater, all these mediums that came before, the possibility of entertainment is so much more than just, giving someone a good toy to play with for hours upon hours. And so it's funny that you mentioned Neverhood, because Neverhood always stood out to me that way too. And of course, I think Tim Apple's pretty amazing talent all around.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to Armacrog. We've actually had him on the podcast 7 times.
Yeah.
Oh, have you really?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, thank God I didn't just trash the guy. Totally set me up. Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. Didn't he? That was crowdfunded too. Didn't he go for it?
Yeah. That's why we had him on so much, because we actually literally were with them from 2 months before the Kickstarter started, and then we did every week that the Kickstarter was running.
Wow.
And then we did like a post-game wrap-up.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, I bet he was really grateful for that.
Yeah, he's become a pretty good friend, and actually going to go down and work on Armacrog for a couple of days.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Have you met him in person?
Not yet. So
you'll be looking up.
Yeah. I'm hoping he can make it to the studio, because I know he's actually in an entirely other state right now, working for DreamWorks. So
right.
Hopefully we'll get to touch base.
Nice.
But, just getting to get hands-on clay is going to be awesome.
Yeah. I mean, that was always. Look at Aardman, right, out of the UK. Like these amazing animation facilities that were doing like clay style. Will Vinton, who was up in Portland. I don't know what happened to Vinton Studios, but that style was like no one's. Has there ever been other, Douglas Apple style claymation games?
No.
Maybe in the indie scene, something I didn't hear of. But
the closest I think was it's called Platypus, and it's like it's a side-scrolling like R-type game, so it's not a lot of depth there.
Right.
Character.
Nice.
But let's talk about the early life of Lorne. In high school, what did you want to be when you were in high school?
At the time, I was. It depends on what years, right? But early on, I was just, not necessarily headed in a positive direction. I was way too much interested in A, not being home, where it was kind of miserable, and then B, just being out and trying to, have fun and get in as much trouble and meet as many girls as you could, right?
Yeah.
And so it was like, that became, let's say the end of that tunnel revealed itself, and I was like, holy shit, I need to really get my act together if I'm going to survive this world. And, not like wind up in jail or something ridiculous or homeless. And each of those possibilities at that time looked, fairly realistic to me, homeless or in jail. And
wow.
And so I didn't come from I came from a lower middle class family, largely military. My dad was nuclear subs for 17 years, and so not a lot of money. Certainly no inheritance. When my family died, I got the bill. I didn't get the the trust fund. But it made me very aware of sort of economic realities, right? So growing up in that environment, and particularly in the Northeast, so you guys can relate to cold, right?
Yeah.
I was in New England, Connecticut, and cold winters. There's an old saying, sometimes like, why are Russians so hard? And they go, long, cold winters, And I think I remember that from the show West Wing, but something about cold weather really sinks in, right? Like you can have a lot of attitude in California, but the sun's still shining. When you freeze your ass off, you look at the world differently. And so looking at the world differently, I was like, what do I have going for me? And it was really only art, and art was something I just loved, right? Because I think I loved escaping. I think that was, a big part of what imagination meant to me. And as a little kid, and parents being divorced young, spent a lot of time alone. You just spent a lot of time escaping into these sort of imaginary worlds, in whatever form it was, whether you were making, Revel model kits or paper airplanes, drawing. These things to me were, I could, if life wasn't pleasant, I could shift into that reality and sort of, be okay there, right? And actually thrive there.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because, in high school, I always found I did my best artistic work when I was angry. It was an outlet to get out the anger and just go create.
It's like a lot of artists, rock and roll in particular, and fine artists, as they get later in life, they go to rehab or something, right? And then you look at their work afterwards, and you're usually like, man, I wish he'd just start drinking again, or whatever he was doing, because the music really sucked now.
I think Aerosmith is a good example of that.
There you go. And it kind of like turned into attractions for themselves, like these concerts. It's like Elvis in Vegas. It was almost like seeing the real guy impersonate himself. It's pretty surreal. But for me, that space, and I found this, kinship in other artists, was really. It felt like the right place to be, and it didn't come with paranoias. It didn't, and it was an escape. And I think games are that too, right? For a lot of people, it's a place to enjoy yourself and not be bothered with the other problems of your life in the world. So I was like, oh, now I got to go. I was totally paranoid. I was like, now I got to get into the best art schools. I have to build my portfolio. I mean, I can't really measure how much fear drove a lot of my ambition, I should say. It was really like, or I'll be homeless, right? So almost everything on the map said, or be homeless, and then it's really bad from there. so every fork in the road was like, I was making my choices real easy and mapping out the future of life, because it was just like, success or devastation, and not much in between. So kind of a little paranoid, a little fearful, and then at the same time, a lot of excitement and, not that our products reflect this, but a lot of angst against the world, right? Yeah. And this is what you were talking about. Like you found you were doing your best creations angry. And anger is something that I think in my life, I've come to believe I've never really made a great decision being angry. Mm-hmm. But I've made a lot of great creative sort of, moments being angry, like a lot of great scenes were created. It can fuel the ether of the imagination well, right? But in life, if you're making those decisions that way, it carries a price.
Well, it's funny. Yeah. It's like a friend of mine on Facebook had said, sometimes you just got to say, fuck it. And my response to that was, in my experience, no good has ever come from me saying "fuck it."
Yeah, you're looking back through your police log. Like, yeah, that was a fuck it moment, and this one was the divorce, the affair that led to divorce, whatever it was.
Yeah,
right? But yeah, so you're looking at life, and you're just. I mean, I think we're all. I know I'm being a little scattered with this, but when I look at the world, I think we're all sort of, for lack of a better term, a bunch of lost souls kind of walking around trying to figure out our way, figure out what we are, why we're here, what we're doing. I think we all suffer this to various degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I can agree.
I mean,
yeah.
I'm almost 40, and I'm doing a ton of stuff I love, but there's no chance I've got it figured out yet.
Right, exactly.
I still feel like a kid,
Well, when I was 16, I knew everything, right? By that time, it was like, the sarcasm being, when you're younger, like even when I started Oddworld, I thought I was so smart, I thought I had all these things figured out. And then you get older and you realize how much you don't know, right?
Yeah.
And so that phenomenon is constantly, raining on me. But in that, so I just wanted to say that there's this, I think it's important I guess I'm speaking to more of the sort of tortured artistic souls out there, which is anyone who really has something they need to express and is finding difficulty getting it out there. And they have that burning passion within, is we really have to measure like where those negative emotions are positive for our creative process and where they're negative for our life. Mm-hmm. And I say that, my first life in the art world was in the fine art world in New York, and I worked for I came to be the assistant of and then running the studio of a guy that was my favorite fine artist in the world, and his name was Jack Goldstein. He was brilliant. I mean, his IQ was off the charts and just turned me on to so many things I was completely clueless about. But not willing to make that separation. In 205, I think he committed suicide. And I've seen that happen. Like I've been fortunate enough to know a wide spectrum of people. And I find that the ones that really sort of embrace their scars, it's like one thing that embrace them as lessons. It's another to embrace them as a sword, And the ones that embrace their scars that way, they tend to be here not as long.
Yeah.
And I've seen that a number of times, and for myself, it's like, I'd like to be here longer than not, So I say that as having witnessed the phenomena again and again and again, that there is a difference between using it to stimulate your work and then using it, in your decisions in life. But enough on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I can relate. I can totally relate.
Yeah. Just kind of laid out my life almost beat for beat there.
Well, speaking of that, you asked when I was back in high school, and when I started actually working for that artist, I was also realizing you had to really, that more and more I was realizing you create your luck. That you do create your opportunities by being there, by being present, by being available, by being visible, by having made stuff. All of these things increase your odds and of success of what you're after. And at that time, I remember making a map, and I still have it today, of what I thought, where I thought I should be. I never liked the word career. I always thought that sounded really cheesy, but where I wanted to be sort of as a creator, and I guess it's career, and as a entrepreneur, I guess I never liked that word either. All this resistance, but I mapped it out, and I knew that I didn't understand necessarily what it was going, but I tried to say all my strengths are going to lead to here. It's going to lead to IP creation. It's going to lead to creating universes and trying to control their destinies with 3D computer graphics and interactivity. And I was mapping that sort of decades ahead. And oddly enough, it's kind of actually worked. From back then, I didn't know where it was going, but I knew I wanted to create worlds. I knew I wanted people to interact with them through 3D computer graphics. I was realizing that in the towards the late 80s. And I knew that the mediums, technology was changing so rapidly, I didn't really know what it was yet. So I created kind of a fuzzy map. And I was like, well, but to get there, I need all these skills first, and then it just became this relentless, voracious path of trying to consume as much, knowledge, skills, learning, and hard knock wisdoms along the way, and, here we are.
It's a good place to be.
Well, thanks. Fortunately, I'm able to speak to you right now because my face after. So this is real quick, right? And then here, I guess this is the other side of the price of what we paid to create what we really care about. Is I had to spend like 4 months in the UK this year, over the past year, just bringing home new and tasty, and helping the team out there, and just not getting enough sleep, like never getting into their cycle. Mm-hmm. And so I was just averaging 3 hours of sleep a night for months. And then I get to E3, and it's like such a crunch to get there. And there's all these moving parts, so it's very stressful. And you're trying to line up press, do everything. And then you're there, and from morning to night, every day you're booked. In our PR company, which is Lick out of the UK, did a great job. And they had us booked from morning till night, every half hour, new interview, boom, all 3 days throughout E3. So you're totally on, it's like, I mean, you guys know when you're on the air, it's a different exertion of energy than when you're not, right? Mm-hmm. You got to be on. And so we get out of E3, and we had a great show, and everyone was really happy. And I go home, and 2 days later, I'm just getting these sort of severe, like inside my head pains. And then I get Bell's palsy, boom, and half my face is paralyzed, like completely paralyzed. So I'm talking like I got in a car accident, really off, right? Like half the face just totally doesn't work. I don't know if you know about Bell's palsy.
Yeah, actually, when I was working in the visual effects industry, my boss got it for a while.
Who are you working with?
I'm one of the co-founders of XYZ RGB. So it's actually a 3D scanning company for movies and video games.
Clever name. Yeah. Yeah, so effects. So having lived the life of visual effects, I left before we started Oddworld. I left Rhythm and Hues, and I just really recently become a visual effects supervisor down there after 5 years at the place, which is amazing people, amazing talent. Rhythm and Hues Studios.
Are they back? Because I heard they shut down.
No, they did. Yeah, the crises of the industry, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so elements of, I mean, they had like a 2,000 plus operation across 3 continents or 4. So elements of it are still operating, but, as we knew it is no longer.
Yeah.
But through all those, all this is hard work, right? And so that your boss had it in visual effects makes total sense to me. This is the second time I've had it in games, and but it's funny because it takes you out, but the price. I mean, I go to acupuncture. I'm like down here at the voodoo doctors every day getting needles picked in me. I'm way ahead of the healing curve. Normal doctors are like, this will take 3 months. I'm like 3 weeks max. Here we go. Calling up, Dr. Chin to stick me. But and these like horrible tasting herbal remedies. But I'll tell you, man. After when I got to the West Coast, I was seeking wiser medicine, wiser health. My family had terrible health. My mom was a nurse, so it was all pills for everything. Right?
Yeah.
And so I was seeking alternatives to that. But getting out here, it's been fascinating for I came out in '87, so almost 30 years. But there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge out here on alternative health stuff. It's been pretty fascinating. So almost 3 weeks, I'm almost back to 100%. But if we were talking last week, you'd swear it wasn't me on the phone.
Talking to Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah. Miles and Corey.
The world.
Exactly.
It's new and tasty.
Yeah. And then, speaking of all that, the stress of life and all that, the other place I used to fall out, to your question, where was this back in high school? The other place I used to escape from it all was in nature. And I was fortunate enough to be in Connecticut. I had separated parents, and one lived on the Connecticut River, basically, which was incredible when it came to diversity of ecosystem, life forms, all these different. Fishing was first love. And that was a real influence in terms of animal behaviors, flocking, like all these things that actually applied later totally to video games. And in particular, Eve's Oddysee was like, here's something that happened to me just recently. I was walking through the woods in the UK up on the top of this mountain outside a hotel. And all of a sudden I hear, like very close, I hear, what the heck is that? And then these huge, huge deer that I didn't even see just boom, bolt out. And they got big racks of horns and they're just out of there upon this growling. And I'm like, I don't know what it is. And I was like, that sounds like a badger, but that can't be a badger. Right. And it turns out I tell these guys, I heard this weird growling. They're like, dude, there's badgers up there. What do you And I'm like, badgers? Jesus, you guys got badgers?
Yeah, but they stay the hell away from the cities.
Yeah, pound for pound, pretty gnarly, ornery guys, right? Well, I would have these encounters with animals throughout my life. And a lot of times it would be, my first love is fly fishing, and I'd just be alone in the woods, and you'd meet big things, and sometimes they weren't happy, right? So it'd be this really, really interesting, birds in particular, because they're just I'm convinced birds are just totally are the reincarnated dinosaurs and cold-blooded as hell. They're just, some intense creatures.
Yeah, who hasn't been attacked by a red-winged blackbird?
Right? Yeah. And I've met some eagles that were just terrifying, and and a swan that actually, yoked my buddy and I up pretty good. Yeah, he jumped in our canoe because we got too close to a nest, and he just smacked us around, man. And those guys are strong. But what I found fascinating was the non-language interaction between creatures, right? And so let's see, a swan is is attacking you or facing you off. You wind up with this dance with something you don't have language with. You have some basic motion controls, right? You can wave your arms, you can walk backwards, you can try to run. You can say whatever you want. It's not going to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And then you're not exactly sure what it's going to do, but it's very clearly alive and aware of you. And I was like, I want more of that in my video game experiences. Like I want to feel like I'm coming upon creatures that are not just an obstacle for me to beat, and that's how I felt about a lot of games in the 2D era, of course, was that the animation wasn't afforded to be lifelike yet. And so you knew it was a game, and it was cool and all that, but it didn't have that extra level of oddness, of disturbingness that comes when you're like, in a room with an uncomfortable big dog who doesn't like you. Right? Like that's an interesting standoff. And so that led to like paramites and scrabs and slogs and those things, was trying to distill those behaviors that you would find in nature, just as a kid walking around in New England and bumping into potentially dangerous things, and then how you dealt with that without having the complexity of language. And so I can see, how that stuff shaped in to the worlds we were trying to create, through the years in the Oddworld universe.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I have to ask about the Oddworld universe. How long was that a creation in your head before you decided to make it a game?
Well, it was actually... this is how I work creatively. It'll shine more light on it, because it was actually kind of a collage of collection over time of ideas that gelled more and more into one. And I find that, I've created a number of properties, but they haven't gotten out there, like I've created them in conceptual writing and production design and movie scripts or whatever, but that doesn't mean they became Oddworld, right? Things outside of that. But the process of creating a universe, IP, to me is, one, any interesting creative ideas you're having, you have to have a journal, or you have to have some way of making notes where you're just logging it quickly and getting it out of your head. And that's part of it, right? Like just logging it quickly so you don't have to think about it. It was a good idea, good. Now it's in a file. You don't have to worry about it. Let your mind be open to more creative problem solving. And I've always tried to be kind of disciplined in doing that. So I'm taking notes of good ideas and not feeling like my head's just getting full of them and I don't want to forget them. And I remember reading about Steven Spielberg and how he came up with the concept for what the spacecraft looked like, what the mothership looked like in Close Encounters. And of course he was smoking a joint on Mulholland Boulevard in LA, right? And they were doing handstands on the car. And they're stoned at night, and they're looking at. He's looking out over the city, doing a handstand on the car, and he's like, "My God, imagine if that was a big spacecraft, And that's how we got the ship for Close Encounters, the mothership. And so it's like capturing those ideas really quickly. But then the more that you for me, a great passion is research. So I research a lot of things. One of the things I like researching is corruption. And at the highest level, what is the criminal overworld doing? And that has led to, lots of interesting discoveries that are inspiring, right? And so at a corporate level, that leads to Gluckins and Magog cartels and, characters and Rupture Farms institutions that go into the universes. But they're inspired by real life stuff that if you do that, what I find is that they have if you say that I'm creating a company and a story, but then you're just in a shallow way developing it, it'll feel that way to the audience. But if you're saying, I'm creating a company and a story, and it's really based on the practices of Monsanto or cheap meat production for fast food companies, right? Then you've got a deep reservoir of stuff that anytime you're trying to solve future problems around that story or property, you can go actually research what these companies did or how they operate or what the lawsuits were. And you can get this really rich stuff that you never would have thought of, right? Like truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, it is.
So you never would have thought of it, and you're like, oh man, that's just perfect. When you find out how diabolical things could get. One that I learned about recently, which is just off the charts, impossible to believe, but I think it's real. Is you got to look. I don't know if you know about the story of the Titanic. And
some of it.
You know the story. But that there was 2 identical ships made at the same time.
Yep.
Yeah.
And do you know how the Titanic was probably the one that didn't sink? What? So you got to check out this documentary. Yeah, I saw it and I was like, this is so ludicrous. I'm just going to watch this just because I think it's bullshit. And it turns out, you know, J.P. Morgan and these guys were the investors in these ships, and they damaged it. And then the insurance company said, too bad, you know, this was all your fault, so we're not covering the damage. And this is huge amounts of money. And it goes into show how they switched branding on the ships and tried to fake the damaging with an accident and basically screwed it up, you know, and then the rest is the whitewash after. But if you know enough about how those entities were operating in those days, and then you watch this documentary, you go, that's exactly what those guys would have done. You know, they operated this way as hidden policy. You know, so it's just fascinating stuff, right? But truth is stranger than fiction. So who would dream that stuff up? And so it's great when you have insights into, you know, the criminal mastermind, or how intelligence agencies work, how multinational corporations, you know, supersede local environmental laws, whatever it is, right? The tactics are just mind blowing. And so if you're referencing that stuff, you know, it's great fodder for comedy, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, so for me, I'm a voracious ingester of research on these calibers, and the ones that I think are important to us as people. And so as an artist, I feel like, you know, part of the mission is trying to reinterpret what we've somehow had the benefit and the luck, you know, the blessing on this planet to be able to afford the time. Like, fortunately, I was born, you know, in the United States. I wasn't born in Sudan, right? Yeah. Like a lot of different things could have been a different path. But with all of that, somehow able to do all that research, you know, grateful for that, able to process it and not have it turn into cancer, hopefully, you know, or a heart attack inside yourself when you realize what's actually going on out there versus what's presented as going on. And then using that as a reservoir to inspire your creative content on the design of, you know, for me, intellectual property. You know, and then if you took a writing course, they'd say, don't write about the stuff you're most passionate about, you know, write about, you know, disconnected. And I've always had problems with that, not philosophically, just in practice. Like, I don't know, man, it's just really hard to create content or work on stuff that I don't really care about.
Yeah.
Yeah, doesn't sound like a wise idea.
Yeah.
Well, myself as a musician, that's like asking me to play, you know, it's like I'm into heavy metal and it's like asking me to play in a country band. I'm not going to be happy about this.
At the wedding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was a wedding DJ for a while, and actually it was slowly driving me insane.
You know, someone once told me, they said everyone in their life should have to be a wedding DJ just once. You know, for a little while, to like see the things that they see. And I don't know exactly what that meant, but I found it kind of fascinating.
Well, I did it for about a quarter of a year, and it was just it was slowly eroding my sanity.
Well, I did it once, and I can definitely say I could not do it for years. So the once was enough.
Yeah. So there's value in it, right?
Yeah.
Knowing what you don't want definitely has value in it.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I think I veered off in some tangent on you.
Well, we could easily turn this whole conversation into, you know, some kind of conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
It's not the Joe Rogan podcast.
Right. I tell you, one of Joe Rogan's favorites is Joe Rogan on DMT. One of my Joe Rogan favorites is definitely Joe Rogan on DMT. I don't know if you've ever listened to that, but you know, it's worth it. Yeah. Yeah, dimethyltryptamine, I think, is what it refers to. It's worth the watch. You know, I'm not endorsing such things. I'm just saying it's worth the listen. Sorry.
Interesting. I may have to check that out.
Yeah.
But yeah, back to video games.
Oh yeah, we make games, don't we? Yeah.
So
I lost you there.
What made you transition into video games, really? Was it just the storytelling aspect? Or, you could have done that in films. Yeah.
Well, yes and no. So I would say it primarily was, meaning I primarily chased the content before the business model, right? The hampering of the artist,
Right.
the Achilles heel of the artist. And hopefully with time I get a little smarter and synergizing the two. But so what I was realizing was that with 3D computer graphics, which I just loved, it's like finding 3D computer graphics for me after learning how to be a painter, in photorealism, and all the work that went into that, the chemistry that went into that. Then seeing computer graphics, I was like, wow, I just get this. I was like a husky that had grown up in Florida its whole life, and finally, it's showing up in Ottawa, right? It's like, hey, I'm home. Finally, I didn't even know I wasn't home, but now I knew. And computer graphics was like that for me. And so I wanted to create properties with computer graphics. So I was trying to then understand, where can computer graphics actually create a viable business? And the truth was, at that time, there was industry application, there was aerospace, there was visualization, there was CAD/CAM, was becoming huge. But in entertainment, not so much, right?
Yeah,
And
I spent that whole era doing logo spins for the shopping network, and
been there. Yep. We'll compare logos someday.
Yeah. we want the logo to be
someday.
gold and then melt it down.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, and there was lots of gold.
The 3D logo spin. Oh, thank God it's gone.
What a period. So, but if you being involved early, you saw that capability, right? Like, I think everyone who was touching it saw it, but then who was really going to go after it? And Pixar really went after it, different effects companies really went after it. But what I was looking at was, I was like, well, at minimum, it's going to be like, at absolute minimum, it would have been 40, 45, 50 million to make a motion picture in CG. TV absolutely was not paying for it. At the time, when I was at Rhythm & Hughes, the projects we were doing, we were charging $1 million a minute, and there was only a 1% markup, right? So it was expensive stuff to make, and no one was getting rich off it. And so I was trying to figure out, I was like, where's that moment that Walt Disney had where he was able to, find a way in to create something that he was able to live with thereafter, that wasn't just built for an acquisition? Where's that moment that Jim Henson had? Where's the moment that Hanna-Barbera had? These Dr. Seuss, like, what did they do that they were able to create something out of their love, their inspiration, whatever that George Lucas, they were able to create it, and then they were able to ride with it for their life. Charles Schultz with Snoopy, with the Peanuts. Like, that era seemed to be evaporating to me very quickly. And I was like, that's what I'm interested in. I want to create I want to put my whole heart and soul, all my research effort, all my blood, sweat, and tears into properties. And if they're really creations like that, they're kind of like children, right? Like, you've really invested a lot and you believe in what they are. So why hand it off if it's good? Why not build something that you can evolve with yourself, that you can, Tolkien did it, right? That's what I was looking for. I wasn't looking for the business plan that says this is how we sell the company in 5 years. And what's odd to me is that's kind of an alien idea in the game space, right? In the traditional publishing sort of, let's just say, in the capitalism space.
Yeah.
So trying to find where games, storytelling, where storytelling and medium, the medium being 3D computer graphics, we're talking about, Oddworld was founded in 1994, so it's quite a ways back there. In 91 and 92, I'm desperately trying to figure out where do we land with creating worlds that have a viable market. And so let's say you were able to get a feature film greenlit, which wasn't going to happen. And even if you did, the studio is going to own it from that moment forward. So maybe you'll get to direct the first one. You'll probably get fired before it delivers. There's all these, the entertainment business, right? Uh-huh. And I'm like, okay, so you can't do that in film anymore. Well, what about television? Well, they weren't paying for high-end CGs unless it was the logos, unless it was the commercials. But no one was making shows. At the time, Reboot wasn't even started yet out of Canada. And, the budgets were low. So it wasn't going to happen there. I was looking at different areas. We was looking at theme parks. We did ride film attractions because at least we were doing 4-minute films of fantasy characters and monsters, and a short film, right, in CG. So we were chasing that for a while. That's how I met Sherry McKenna, who had produced rides like the Back to the Future simulator attraction at Universal Studios and other simulator attractions around the world. And we were really on sort of the cutting edge of that. And I was like, this is all going to go interactive. Like, okay, so now we're moving to the film. Bullshit, man. We got to get into that screen. We got to get into that world. We got to get into games. And 3D graphics, like I had seen in aerospace early, when I first got to California, the CG industry was in kind of had sprouted up and then collapsed real quick, and then it was slowly coming back, but there wasn't a lot of work, so I went to work for aerospace. This was the only place I could get on SGI machines, and I just so happened to somehow be one of those early users, and they needed users, and I got to go work on Star Wars stuff, and under Reagan, and that was incredibly insightful, on a lot of different levels. Was just fed my desire to want to make more IP, at a research interest, sort of philosophical level, and also at purely a technical level. And
now, how much did that drive you nuts doing that type of work? Because, the whole reason I left XYZ RGB was I wasn't doing anything creative. I was remeshing scan data and handing it off to companies that would do the animation. And that drove me nuts.
Yeah, and I can see that, right? And I've had some of those roles at times too. This was a slightly different situation. This was a room under a guy named Jim Bannister, who had created this division. They called it the Visualization Laboratory at TRW, and it was the only one at the time at TRW. And TRW was designing basically theoretical and not yet to be developed technologies that they were looking for funding for from the Pentagon, right? So how the industrial military complex works is you have private companies selling solutions and then getting enormous budget awards, right? So they're trying to sell you a satellite, but it's a $5 billion project. Instead of saying we're going to sell you 500 tanks for $1 billion, they'll build one thing. It was interesting to see how industry, manpower, size of the delivered packet changed, just with high technology. So they're able to say, like I said, one satellite could be worth the value in a contract of what previously would have been a contract for 1,000 tanks or something, So it was very interesting to watch how they were dealing with sort of economy and budget, seeking budgets to get awarded. And I saw how visualization could award projects, and everything we visualized, I believe, got awarded. And but we were visualizing this stuff where it was basically like we were interpreting between the scientists and the generals, because the generals really, in their own words, no longer really understood what the hell the scientists were talking about. It wasn't bombs and bullets anymore. It was different stuff.
We want it to look dangerous.
Yeah, this is more like stuff you never see coming. Eyes in space. A lot. It was Star Wars tech. So
yeah, of course.
The stuff that people, we live in the matrix, right? We have perceived realities of what we think is going on, and then there's more likely what's going on, and they're pretty big chasm between the two. But people still. Anyway, without going down that path of what people still believe, I caught myself. Good save, Lorne. Okay, but seeing that showed me that that the power of visualization was kind of like that was how Lucas won Star Wars, right? He hired Ralph McQuarrie, the production designer, who was traditionally a tank and sort of out of Detroit. He was like a tank and munitions designer. He was designing tanks and military stuff, and he was amazing. Ralph McQuarrie, right? Amazing production designer. He painted those. I think he did 7 or 11 paintings for Star Wars, and that's what ultimately got the project greenlit.
Yeah.
And so if you thought about visualization, we were visualizing projects for theme parks and winning contracts, visualizing projects. So I was seeing more of how you win projects, win financing, and visualize, using the technology to visualize things that are hard to see. And along that period, you go back to the early 90s, we were still in Sega, Genesis, and SNES territory, right?
Yeah.
And so we were not, with the exception of Sky Fox coming out on Nintendo with a special chip in the cartridge, we weren't having 3D yet. And or maybe you were getting some on PC, right? Yeah. But it was really the announcement and introduction of 3DO. I mean, I'm really getting into the history of the consoles here and the roles that they inspired. But 3DO was that first time where they said they were going to have CD-ROM as an image retrieval, as a memory capacity, as a storage device. And that meant suddenly 600 megabytes versus 128K or 60, what those guys were doing like back in the Virgin days or stuff, or the early days of consoles where they were dealing with cartridges. I mean, I don't know how they did it, man. It's like dental surgery with no Novocaine. I mean, just painful. So I was always, unlike most of my peers in visual effects, I was always totally blown away with what video game guys were doing once I understood what they were doing. And even though we were doing 70 millimeter film, rhythm hues, I think, they did projects when I was there, like Babe and the movie, and a lot of these things. They won Academy Awards. They were really at the top end, but they didn't understand. I say they. I meant my peers. To the most degree, did not understand the sort of brilliant magic that game makers were making happen with so little, and instead, we had 3 SGI refrigerators rendering, 20 hours a frame. Who cared? Put on more processors, like total hogs. Whereas these guys, and I had seen a little of this before have to happen in the simulation industry that was military real-time simulation, where efficiency mattered. But to the game guys, efficiency was the name was the rule, right? And so if someone could figure out how to write something in the least amount of memory, that was the most valuable guy. And as that was happening, I was like, I couldn't use 3D graphics to make cartridge games, right? Because I made 3D graphics. So with the announcement of 3DO, I started really getting interested, and I started trying to convince at that time Sherry McKenna, who had previously convinced to come be vice president of special projects at Rhythm and Hues. I was trying to convince her we need to start a game company. And I was trying to convince her because she was the most awesome executive producer I had ever seen in action. I mean, she was totally badass. Like studio heads would come in furious about something on a big project, and they'd walk out apologizing to her, and we weren't doing more work. Right? And the other a lot of producers in the business could be like, they're just always trying to make the client happy, and you're the guy in the trench. You're like, man, when does it stop? Well, you're just going to have this paint shit forever to wear. And but she would actually manage it really well. So I was blown away with her, and I was like, this is the type of person that needs to really be my boss. And so I was like, you need to think about this. And it took a couple of years. But in that time, then PlayStation announced that they were going to be coming out. And if you remember, there was another, the Duo. What was the Duo? The NEC device, there was another DVD-ROM drive. And all of a sudden, just hearing games with, like, music, and Myst coming out. And you're like, wow, you can actually, go to that cool tower in the lake, and it's really cool. So I was seeing the beginnings of being able to take 3D computer graphics, being able to take the interactivity of games, and being able to take my other passion, which was like production design for movies, for worlds, for bringing that like beauty shot in from the sci-fi movies that I grew up on, from the 50s, Forbidden Planet, where you just got transported into these worlds. I was like, I want my games to feel like that, and so. Taking all those things into consideration and searching, more importantly, like I say, I was looking for where can you own the IP so you can stay with it. It wasn't about greed. It wasn't about it wasn't about being a control freak. It was about understanding the industry enough and understanding capitalism enough to realize that if you didn't have those controls, eventually you would have no control.
Yeah, and that's with Doug Tenay and the guys, where they're still kicking themselves for losing the rights to Earthworm Jim and the Neverhood.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, what wonderful, properties, right?
Yeah, and that's what they're really hoping Armacrog does for them, is because those entities are all locked up now, and they've been trying to convince the studios to let them do something new, that these franchises can still make money, and they're not listening. So they're hoping Armacrog will prove that, so that they can get some of this IP back.
Well, I think they're. I think that's right for them. I think they're thinking the right way. I think crowdfunding it was the right way. I totally wish them well, and I think it's a hard road.
Yeah.
Because then you wind up having to babysit for typically what the big boys are babysitting for. And I refer to that as trademarks in different territories globally.
Yeah.
The costs associated with that, all the legal fees, all the protections, all the currency conversion challenges that are constantly emerging, and you're dealing with, I mean, there's a lot of things that as an artist you never thought you'd be tackling. And so with what they're doing, I totally wish them well, and I think they're absolutely approaching it the right way. Now, here's what we saw at the time, and this is what I think made us a little different, is most of the people that were in the game business were out of the game business. Like, they were coming out of games. And the game business, and this is what I recognized, the game business was looking at product as the way the toy business did. And the toy business looked at product as you make a toy, and if it works, if it hits, that's great, and you make as many as you can until it's not popular anymore. And then when it's done, it's through. It's out, right?
Yeah.
Garbage Patch Kids is not still – well, it might be still around. I might be speaking out of my ass here, but I don't think it's still around, And, what was the other one that Coleco had back in the day? It was Cabbage Patch or whatever.
Yeah,
whatever it was.
Well, there was the
Garbage Patch Kids.
Garbage Patch Kids. Close enough.
Yeah, now that one I'll buy. But you're looking at this. I was realizing, I was going, oh my God, the game industry does not yet realize that it's a content business. It's not looking at brands and IP. It's just looking at if it can have a hit, it'll exhaust it. And then every publisher you talk to said, well, sequels only do 50% of the original. So they weren't betting on sequels. And I went, this is it. This is our moment in history. This is our time. Because this industry does not yet understand the value of IP. But Hollywood learned a lesson, television learned a lesson, music industry learned a lesson, certainly novels had learned a lesson. Go try and license a Stephen King novel and see what it costs, right?
Yeah.
And he owns it all. But games had not yet learned that, and all the authorities in games go, no, you just don't understand. Here's the conventional wisdom. And I was like, oh, my God, this is it. And I was looking at moments in history, and tell me if I'm boring you, man, but I think they're kind of interesting, is I was looking at moments in history like, how did Disney do what he did? And here it is in 2 minutes. And how did Lucas do what he did? What happened? How did Hanna-Barbera do what they did? Like, they weren't just guys that wanted to make animations. There had to be some timing. There's a lot of guys in the world as smart as Bill Gates, but not all of them had the timing and the moment in history where they could seize it the way that Bill Gates did, right? Or the way that Steve Jobs did. There's been people that smart throughout history, but they weren't in the right place at the right time to seize that possibility. And so I'm looking for that possibility, like voraciously, or I'm going to be homeless, right?
Yeah.
that's like there's no, total success or absolute failure. There's nothing in between, which was kind of how I looked at the world. And so now with Lucas, with Disney, it was really interesting because he was the first. And what happened was, at his time, it was very similar to the game industry, which was the movie studios owned the theaters. So the studios and the theaters were one and the same. And if anything was going to play in those theaters, the studios were going to own it. And Disney found this out after he started making his Steamboat Willie and all that, his little peep shows. And I mean that in the old Nickelodeon sense, right? Because they were nickel-driven experiences. That's what Disney started as, peep shows. And then they could actually project on the screens as theater was becoming, as peep shows were becoming putting screens into theaters, which were playhouse theaters. And at the time, that's what it was, right? It was a screen, you had a projector, and then you had the piano player from the local church. That was the soundtrack. And Disney is now trying to get his little short films, which he's like, hey, these would be perfect for the theaters that are now across the land. And they're going, yeah, that's interesting. We'd like these. We'd like to play them in our theater. And, of course, we'll own them. And he was like, no. I want to own them because I have big plans for these. And they were like, yeah, that's too bad. So good luck. And he could get them played anywhere. But then they made the fatal mistake. And the mistake was that they created the jazz singer, right? Al Jolson, the first talkie. And what they did was they had to update all their key theaters, the most important ones where they wanted to premiere that, all the big cities. And they had to upgrade them for audio with a mag track, right? Like they now had to play back a synchronized audio. And the world had never seen that. And so now they don't know, the studios don't know that this is going to work, but it was kind of like, there was a number of studios, so it's hard to say it was a monopoly, but it was basically all tied up, right?
Yeah.
And so the audience, the theaters are like, we're trying this new technique, talkies, and so we've upgraded all the theaters, and now we've upgraded the theaters enough to test it. Let's test it. But we're talking about movies took a long time to make back then, so they test the jazz singer, and it goes through the roof. People can't believe it, right? It's like they're watching magic. It's cracked. They want more tomorrow. And the movie industry is going, we don't have any more talkies tomorrow. It's going to take us a while to make them. And they're like, that's nice. Well, why don't you let us know when you do? And in the meantime, we're not going to see the rest of your movies because they're all old and shitty sounding now, right? And we've tasted the future, and that's it. That's all it takes is for the audience to taste the future. And then times change, and then the conditions can change, and they change for Disney at that moment because now he goes, I can go back and I can put mag tracks onto my animation, and I can add – not, before it was just piano, but I can go back and I can dub in little voices and I can make them, add some more loops, and they dance a little longer to different music, and we can add sound effects. And so he started doing all that, showed it to the studios, and the studios go, this is great. Yeah, we'll play it. And of course we need to own it. And he's like, no, you can play it, but I'm owning it. And they were like, okay. The fact is, if it wasn't for that moment, we may have never heard of Walt Disney unless you were an animation student reading animation history.
Mm-hmm,
right?
Yeah.
It was those conditions. Lucas was similar. It was the licensing deal with Fox, right? Lucas grew up going and watching Buck Rogers in the theater, right? And Flash Gordon and on the weekends. And they were totally excited for that stuff. And they wanted the toys and they couldn't buy them. They wanted Buck Rogers toys. They were making their own rockets out of their little red wagons. They were making the dolls of Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. They wanted them, but the toy industry and the movie industry weren't connected yet in their time, right?
Yeah.
And so now he has this vision that if he can be successful with this, and he's thinking long term, which is why he archived the content. He's thinking of this universe that would have infinite sequels, and he was thinking pretty entrepreneurial about it. But he's also thinking, how do I get this thing made? How do I prosper from this, right? I mean, the guy knows how to prosper in hindsight, right? But he said, well, in order to get it made, he had to just keep on cutting his director's fees. And he said, well, why don't I, here, I can cut that director's fee down, to here, but why don't you just, compensate me a little with these licensing rights over here for toys, because they're not worth anything. And they were like, yeah, they're not worth anything. Right? And that's how he got the licensing rights. Now, boom, Star Wars comes out. It's a hit. He's the one exploiting the licensing. He earns enough through that to buy back the IP from Fox, right? So he earned billions through that, enough to buy back the IP, and then converted that as basically a self-published indie into the last 3 Star Wars movies, sadly. But for his bank account, very good, right? But that's another moment. For Hanna-Barbera, what they had done was they figured out how to economize what was beginning to happen in animation, where they would replay the run cycle, where Disney wasn't doing that yet. He was into, Cinderella fidelity, right? And making it all wonderful. And meanwhile, Hanna-Barbera's like, look, if we have Fred and Barney running right, we can use them for 100 shows. you know? And we'll just flip those cells, and it's all about the comedy and the jokes and the writing. That economic sort of efficiency game for cheap animation is what led us to be able to see the successes of Hanna-Barbera. So I was always looking at those opportune moments, you know, and most of those stories that we've heard of have a moment like that somewhere in their history. And if you're reading the biographies, and this I advise everyone to do, especially young people with ambition, is read the biographies of people you like and people you don't like, you know, like read them all. And because you're gonna find these moments that they failed in and they succeeded in, and opportune timings that if they didn't seize, you never would have heard of them.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And so, you know, a lot of that was driving me too. But I really saw in games that the game industry did not yet understand the value of ownership of IP. It was more interested in the value in the ownership of resources and assets. But it wasn't stupid, right? So it was accumulating those IPs because it's just common business practice. If you're paying, you're keeping, right? If you're funding that content, if you're a movie studio, record label, game publisher, it's the expectation you're gonna own that content, even if you're not milking it yet, right? Even if you don't know what to do with it yet, it's the golden rule, and he with the gold, he's gonna take home the most treasure. He has the money, he has the power. So I was looking for how to break out of that cycle, and when I saw that games didn't really value IP, that's when I said to Sherry, we got to own the IP, we got to own the IP. This is what we have to stay focused on, even if it's not, even if we're not. It has to be a very long-term plan, and part of it was about financial success because it takes that to build bigger and better things. And I wanted that in life because didn't want to be homeless, and it's never. I still think about it sometimes, but that led me to believe that was one of the moments in my life that I would not see many of again, and I had to seize if I wanted to create this thing I had a vision to create, which was entertainment that I could grow and nurture with over time, that had excellence in craftsmanship, that expressed ideas and concepts that I thought would be nutritious for the world, and just the ability to express that. And I don't mind working really hard. So that's what really led to saying we got to get into games now. And my peers in visual effects thought I was nuts. There was a few that went on to have that got it and went on to have very successful game careers. But for the most part, they didn't see it at all. They just thought you were being crazy. Why would you go work on crappy graphics? That's all they saw.
And meanwhile, it ended up being one of the most beautiful games that anybody had ever seen. And it just blew minds.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. That's
just the first time you ever started up Abe's Oddysee and the cinematics started, you were just like, holy shit. Video games have changed.
It's funny because it was the industry knew it didn't know 3D at the time, and that was a huge in for us, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't that we got. I don't think we ever would have got funded by a game publisher in the beginning because the game publishers wouldn't have believed we could pull it off.
Well, no, it was a story. It had a message, and at the time, games didn't have that unless you were playing point-and-click adventures, which were really the only games that told story, which was why I was so addicted to them, because I wanted story.
Right. And people, those Tim Schafer games that everyone loved, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And but just imagine, hey, I got this guy, he's not good looking, actually he's kind of ugly. And he's not who you want to be, he's kind of who you really are. Kind of pathetic, and he's going to wind up genocided, and in a factory farm, and everyone's going to get chopped. But the goal, the end boss, is we're going to blow up the whole corporate board. Right? Actually got away with that, but no one would have bought it as a pitch. We got to make it. That is what happened in the game. But it was more, we were leveraging our experience in 3D computer graphics, in managing large projects, in convincing them that we knew how to handle the game industry was also still scaling in teams. It was very rare to hear about a 60-person team, a 100-person team. It was beginning to you hadn't even heard of double-digit budgets yet in the millions. It's like $1 million was still a big game, and so all these changes were taking place, and I think there was we got money from outside the industry that thought it was going to make money in the industry. And because do you remember Rocket Science? The Rocket Science game development studio. Yeah, it was like, composed out of Apple people and a bunch of different people. Ron Cobb, the famous film production designer, different people, and they were going to, bring 3DO to life, right? And they took it public before they even made anything. They just had a great, sounding team with great resumes. I think it was QuickTime team, or I'm not exactly sure, out of Apple, film production guys and guys from ILM that knew 3D graphics, and they packaged together the story and they sold it to Wall Street to the tune of like $40 million. And so they raised $40 million without having built a game. And so it was a real Wall Street type of play. And so at the time, people thought they could do that they could pull together various talent, package it with a certain sales pitch, and go turn it into a public offering in Wall Street, within like a year. And really, that's how we got the initial money, was someone that was looking, an entity that was looking to make that kind of play. And so they were looking to make money before they really believed we could make a great game. And I think that they thought it didn't matter, because this is how Wall Street and the whole like Sillywood, this IPO bullshit works, right? It's all stories and perceptions. There's not even anything real. And all of a sudden something can be worth, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, today billions of dollars. And there's not even a revenue stream, right?
Gee.
Like Twitter or something. And so that we had the skills, the right story at the right time, and we could speak to games intelligently. I had done a lot of homework. I'm always terrified to be the guy in the room who doesn't know what he's talking about. So I did a lot of homework to understand it. I think I had a pretty good wrap down for the day. And at least it seemed like I wasn't a total idiot about it. And it filled out their portfolio in the way that they were making it look a bigger play. And if not for that, seizing that timing of knowing that there would be money, looking for those solutions, we arrived at the right place at the right time, and we were able to secure it. It didn't work out the way that those initial investors thought it would, but they got whole, and then because we were able to build a prototype at that point, we were able to build a fully functioning prototype. Then we were able to get a publishing deal. Then we were getting the excitement. But until that moment, if you were an industry guy, you probably weren't that smart if you thought we'd actually pull it off.
Yeah.
In fairness.
But you did pull it off.
Yeah, we did. It was brutal, though. It was hard. It was, I count the gray hairs on my head. I'm like, yeah, this group came from that project. And these in the back here, I remember when they got here. Yeah. You wear the scars. But, like all things, I mean, I tell the teams I work with all the time, this is what we do is really not that important, right? It's a luxury that we get to make entertainment, that we get to be expressive in our craft. We're not heart surgeons. We're not growing food for people. We're not a hospital that's fixing people. We're not building houses that people need to live in. We're kind of superficial. We don't really matter. And that's a luxury for us. But the price is we need to work harder.
Yeah.
We actually, it's not free. There's a whole slew. There's people digging ditches, and there's people, working in horrendous conditions by the billions across this planet. Slavery is higher than it's ever been in human history by sheer numbers. And so we're really lucky that we get to do it. But the price is, it's hard work, and it is a competitive landscape. And personally, I'm a very competitive person, but I don't like to create losers. Yeah. I don't want to be competitive so I can beat someone. I feel competitive because I really want to achieve and build great work. But the idea, when I see these Wall Street types or the Silicon Valley, startup types saying, we're going to go in, we're going to destroy this industry, we're going to take their market share, and basically all I'm hearing is we're going to put 4,000 people out of work because we think that's really good, for us. Yeah. And it just sounds like total assholes, and relative to what the kind of planet needs today. And so here we are. I was off on another tangent. Bring it back to reality.
It's okay. I mean,
it's all relevant.
That kind of brings us right up to where you are now, because you're basically recreating a classic game, two classic games mashed into one, I guess, right?
Well, kind of taking the learns from the second, with that, but not the story.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. We were talking a lot about business here. So at a business level, what we did was we succeeded in owning the IP, and by the time we really became whole with that, the industry had changed so much that it was now realizing IP and development resources is the name of the game, right?
Yeah.
It's one or the other or both. If you've got an id or an Epic or a company that BioWare where you got great games and great talent, right? But what was happening was costs are going up. The price of games is not going up. The industry's changing very rapidly. It realizes it's all about IP. It doesn't want to fund or distribute anything that it doesn't really own anymore. It's not incentivized to do that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when I say this, people think I'm complaining about the industry, but I'm really talking about capitalism. Right?
Yeah.
And so, what's this idea? We're big, now we need a growth model to survive. It's like, no, you don't. But when you're built on all funny money on these houses of cards, you do. And now that leads to, how often do founders stick around? Right?
Yeah.
So it leads to
this year, 3 or 4 founders of big video game companies have just moved on now.
Yeah. It's understandable. Yeah. So then what we did was we got hold of the IP, but we saw that would not last, that we would not be able to retain that. And we didn't have the mega success, we didn't have the Gears of War success or the Halo success, right?
Right.
That where you're, you're just rolling it. And my hat always goes off to the guys that have it, and I've always been trying to get it, and I can't complain. We've been blessed. We've had a lot of success. So I'm not complaining, but we didn't have that success that allowed you to say we get to make our own choices, like what the Ram brothers had after the first Myst, right? Let's build a building. Okay. They could do whatever they wanted. We didn't have that. So we could see that the writing was on the wall, and it was basically acquisition plays or nothing. And that was not the reason we started the company. So we made the bet that eventually, digital distribution and all would offer alternatives where you didn't have to go through the normal channels to reach your player, to reach your customer. And in taking that bet, we had to self-finance it because, like I said, no one's really interested in financing your stuff if they don't own it.
Yeah.
They'll only be interested after they think it's going to be success and they might be able to make some money on it even if they don't own it, right? But then they don't want to pay for anything. They just want to, distribute for you or something.
Yeah, exactly.
So in figuring out how to basically, protect and retain the IP and without being able to afford to make new content, because you got to, banks don't loan money for content, right? Silicon Valley does not loan money for content. VCs do not fund content. They don't. None of these real traditional investors want to be in a hit-driven business. And I've learned this by talking to massive amounts of investors over the years, and I learned a lot about what they see. But so basically, if you're in the game space, publishers are paying for it, or no one is. And it's largely the same in Hollywood, except you can get other people to pay for it because they're more interested in hanging out at the parties.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it, right? It's like, if you have Super Bowl tickets that you can give to someone, you can create a big business out of that. I'm just thinking of like what sponsors do, how they can, who shows up at what sporting events. If you have Wimbledon, you can fill it with billionaires, right?
Yeah.
But no one's doing that in games. So in games, the only people that were largely paying was the big publishers. They were having their own hard time, right? I haven't talked a lot about this, but they were having a really hard time.
Oh, yeah. I was in the video game industry 3 years ago when the big crash happened and studios started closing. I was working at a very small studio, and it still affected me and cost me my job because the studio I was working for had just bought a studio that pretty much did exclusively games for Atari, and then Atari decided, whoa, we can't make any games anymore because this game just failed, and now we can't afford to keep making games. So they shelved everything they were working on. And that just trickled right down to my desk.
Yeah, that's the real trickle down in this country, right?
Yeah, and I'm an artist, so the artists are always the first to go.
Yeah,
because the gaming industry, they seem to think that only it takes developers to make games, and it doesn't take artists. It has historically been a code-driven thing, right? Yeah.
And I think that made us a little unique in the beginning because we weren't founded as a coach. You know, I wasn't John Carmack or Tim Sweeney, you know, or I was a designer, an artist, and there weren't artists that would. I really didn't see artists starting game companies at that time. In the historical respect, you know, I was not a programmer. I was not a traditional game designer. I'd never designed a game before. Okay. But as a designer, I think as a authentic designer, everything in life is a design problem. So it doesn't matter, you know, if it's surgery, a designer can shed light for a surgeon, you know, on another way they could approach it. I mean, there's so many things in life that can just be solved with a good design solution. But the point being is that as this naive designer going into games, it brought a lot of isms that I didn't have a lot of the taints that established game designers already had, that people who were in the business already had. I didn't have all of the lessons of what we know works and what doesn't work, and here's the model of how we're going to track ramping. I didn't have all those lessons to kind of, in my opinion, taint what I thought, you know, wisdom was told us. Instead, I had more of the user experience saying, I want more of this. I enjoy it when that's happening. I enjoy it less when these other things are happening. So it was kind of, you had the design discipline, but you did not have the totally hot shit engineering talent, you know, at the formation of the company. So it really was more of a design driven company first.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am. I've actually started my own indie studio, but we're all artists right now, and we're hiring ourselves out to like educational companies and small to medium sized video game companies because they don't have artists. So I'm kind of me, and then I contract out 4 other people for whatever is needed, and we just drive the content for them.
Well, I think there's a big future in that, personally. I mean, I don't know. I think it's a more sustainable future is heading where that is going to be more normal than the exception. For instance, on New and Tasty, we hired Mauricio, who used to work for us at Oddworld for years on multiple projects, and he did what you're doing. So out of his studio, Monkey Brain, in L.A., which is basically where he lives, he's managing. He'll scale to a number of other animators around the world that he knows through, you know, the animation forums, through working together at Blizzard, Oddworld, wherever, teaching it at the universities, and did an incredible job relative to, you know, time, amount of people working on it, and cost. So I think, and that's the key, right? If he was a bigger studio, I don't know that we would have been able to afford it because there would have been all these additional built-in costs that aren't unreasonable, but just make it more expensive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my company, where I look over all my artists over Skype. We, you know, transfer files, and I don't have an extra rent over my head to charge my clients for, because I'm doing it at my home office. So I keep my costs low, and hopefully I can keep the lights on.
Well, I think that's the key, because burn rate kills you. Yeah. You know, and so if you had, let's, you know, take Oddworld back. You know, you go back. I mean, the burn rate. You know, you're approaching $1 million a month, and so 1 month goes by where everyone's not working, and if you even had that in the bank, it's gone. You know, so it really, the burden of having to keep your overhead funded starts driving your design decisions, and that's what I found. You know, I mean, in some ways, Strange is a reflection of that. I think in a positive way, but I realized we wouldn't be able to make action adventure games that competed in a landscape where consoles are selling for, you know, what did the Xbox release for? $499. Yeah, $5. Where it basically says, which basically said it's a hardcore gamers market.
Yeah,
right? Even as the you know, casual gaming was proving itself more and more, but. So Stranger was a reflection of looking at the conditions and going, we just can't compete. We have to design in more rampable challenge into the mechanics that we're building. And how do you compete with a shooter where you're basically, I'm oversimplifying here, but for the sake of discussion, where you're basically creating like one gun piece of code. And then you're changing parameters for how big is the clip, what's its firepower, how long is its velocity range, you know, all these things, right? And now you've got 50 different guns from one piece of code. and then you can ramp it for the player, but you're economizing one good, solid piece of code. When you're doing those adventure games, or you're doing the story game, or a Douglas and Apple game, every scenario is using some different sort of special code or something. Or even the Oddworld games in the beginning, the platformer games, were trying to be smarter and not have to create, new code everywhere.
Yeah.
But when you're doing puzzles, it's very tough because you know the puzzle, right? But if it's shooting, you have a skill that you're getting better at. And what I saw was we were just going to get wiped out by shooting if the industry continued to sort of, increase in budgets, and if the retailers were increasingly, basically showing fewer games on the shelf, and if those big games were coming out that would, just sell millions and millions of units, they were going to get that prime visibility at retail, right?
Yeah.
But as long as we could get onto the digital shelf, and this is where, the second coming of the indie possibility is happening, then you're on the shelf. And as long as people can like it and will spread the word on it and recommend it, then it's still accessible in 6 months from now and 2 years from now. It doesn't evaporate and become inaccessible. And that was, I watched so much of that happen. It was just devastating, where you go, this product not out there when the commercials are running, or, territories are going, oh, congratulations, you're sold out, but we can't get the game. And you're like, we have these sales that we could be capturing and we're not, and you just see that, you're not maximizing that possibility on the back end after you put your heart and soul into something for a couple of years to build it, and so all those things were like, retail was really shaping a lot of design and the kinds of content we were getting indirectly. But now that we're back to small teams can release small product, and it's not being filtered by what a retailer is willing to carry or not, that changed everything, in my opinion. And really, Apple opened that up, right, with the iPhone free dev environment.
Yeah.
That really opened it up, where people were like, wait a minute, there's another way to think about how to build digital content and distribute it. And instead of keeping it exclusive to only the highest, best practitioners, which is basically what the old console days were, instead of keeping that exclusive, we'll make it more, for lack of a better word, more open source-ish, and hey, if you want to build something for this product, we'll supply a network where you can sell it. If you can find an audience, good for you. And here's the rules, don't break them. Here's the dev software. Good luck.
Yeah.
And that just changed everything. And that's what's happening now. That's shaping the game industry. And as a result, I think we're seeing fabulous benefits, which is far greater diversity of types of experiences being made. And of course, that had to happen at a lower price point because they're more risky.
Yeah, and that's the double-edged sword there, is everybody expects to get their games for 99 cents now, no matter where they're buying them.
Yeah. Well, there's some people that are like, they believe that anyone who's not eating at McDonald's is getting ripped off, right?
Yeah.
And anyone who's not shopping at Walmart is an idiot because they're overpaying for the products they're buying. So there's some people that will never eat a 5-star meal, right?
Yeah.
And then there's others that'll never go in that drive-through.
Yeah.
But so everyone's different. But when we look at what's going on out there with the pricing, I think that shapes where we're at today with the indie perception of, it's got to be $9.99 or maybe $15.99. But because it's an indie game being digitally downloaded, it can't be $20, and it certainly can't be $30, right? It can't be $29. These perceptions are all out of line with what does it take to build the product, because that's really where it's going into. That's where the money was spent, right?
Yeah.
So people go, well, if it's not a disc, I'm not going to pay that. I'm going to wait for the sale on Steam, and I'm going to get it for $9.99. Well, you know what? That disc costs 50 cents, dude. You didn't pay $30 extra for that disc. That you paid $60 for. That other $30 went straight to the retailer. It went straight to the store. None of that money's in the game.
Yeah.
But when you're buying from indies directly through digital distribution, that money's going back to two sources. It only gets split two ways for the most part. 30% is pretty common. It's not like anyone's out there renegotiating deals with, your general networks, right? It's like iTunes. There's a ratio split. We get it. 30% is the network that's selling your product. 70% goes back to the seller, to you. And it's very easy to understand right now. How much can you sell? What kind of product do you want to build? We're in that realm now where at $9.99, I don't think we can sell enough products to build this quality of game in this space.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And, I don't believe we are at $19.99. So what we did was we really looked at it and we said, what is fair? It's all about fair and communicating accurately, why, right? So what we're trying to figure out is we're going, wow, there's people get upset in different territories if they feel like the U.S. has a better deal than the U.K. or the European territories. Asia tends to be more separated, but there tends, you got more similar speaking languages in these territories that can really get heated about subtle stuff. What are the things that we can do to make it more appealing? But how do we help the audience understand that this is not something that's built by two guys in a bedroom in their spare time that they managed to get out after 2 years and now they're making money?
Yeah, it's almost like you have to put out the disc and charge $60 and then push it a digital download for the 30.
Yeah.
Just to make people think they're getting a deal.
And you can't do it, right? Because the retailers don't want to carry a $30 product either.
Right.
So you got this weird, that it needs to be at minimum 40 for them to be interested. Right. And at least in the console space, right?
Yeah.
There's still bargain bin.
I think Nintendo actually did a brilliant marketing thing recently. I mean, it got me. Is Mario Kart 8 came out, and it was like, buy Mario Kart 8, and you get a free digital download of one of these other 6 games. You pick. And it kind of drives you to realize, well, maybe I just want to start downloading my games. Maybe I do want to pay this price over here and start getting these games. Which I think Nintendo really has to do. I mean, they're not doing so well right now, and I think they could really own that digital space if they really started pushing that. I'm
not writing Nintendo off.
No,
I just think they are not going away. I think they may have made some mistakes. They may not be performing at the races the way people expected them to, but I don't see that company falling out. I see them coming back. Right?
Nintendo's like a roller coaster. I mean, I loved the GameCube. I still love the GameCube, and I still own one. It was considered a flop by a lot of people, and then the Wii came out. Everybody laughed at it, and then everybody bought it.
Yeah.
So whatever they do next will probably be amazing. Yeah.
I think there's lots of possibilities. I think, they'll have their challenges, but they're not short on cash. Right? They can, hold on a second. Sorry.
That's apocalypse.
Yeah, that's my phone.
House on lockdown.
Sorry, where was I? I just got distracted there.
Nintendo.
Nintendo.
Yeah, I mean,
at that time with the Wii U success. Sorry, real quickly, with the Wii U success, and then what happened immediately afterwards? Most successful entertainment company in history. Yeah. Right? That was Wall Street saying Nintendo is the most success. That was the Wii. That was one generation ago. Their coffers are still there. They're dedicated to the purpose. I don't know what they're going to do, but I'm still betting that they're here.
Yeah,
they're not going away.
Very awesomely, they were the first company to go to Pencil Test Studios there, Doug TenNapel and the guys, and said, we want Armacrog. And, they were like, yes, we will release Armacrog. We want it. Day one release. It's got to be on the Wii U.
Yes.
I was a backer, and I've got my 2 copies now. I got my boxed copy, and I'm going to have my digital download Wii copy that I actually play.
Yeah, and I think it's perfect for the audience as well. I think the Nintendo audience is very unique. We want to access the Nintendo audience more. We're a little dependent on Unity and its conversion capabilities getting there. So I hope all that goes well. But we have every intention of being there. And on the Wii U, we just don't have a date yet.
Yeah.
But it's a culture. As a culture, Nintendo is a severe gaming culture, and it's not going to go away. But and because you have the Japanese component, I think you have a lot of heritage, a lot of legacy. And those things can hold you up in this modern, fast-moving world, right?
Yeah.
But, they learn, and they'll adapt, and they're willing to try new and different things. So I'm curious what they do. If I were to go over there and run it, I know I'd try a whole bunch of different things, but one of them would certainly be I'd focus in on the 3D headsets.
Yeah.
And where that's going, because, the more I play there, the more I realize it's a whole new ball game changer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That looks really interesting. I've seen quite a few things on it so far, and it's like, it looks, it's in its infancy right now, but it does look pretty amazing.
Yeah, and it's what I find so fascinating is that it levels the playing field where it's going to be design that makes the difference. I think because we have such a acclimation orientation challenge entering into the screen, right, into the headsets.
Yeah,
it's very easy to blow it. It's very easy to make people nauseous, and I think the lessons are going to come from other games, other industries, more so than they're going to come from games that are going to solve those problems. We're very particularly interested in solving those problems as well. Not necessarily Oddworld, but just personally as a designer. It's that chance where you can have an enormous company, but as a nobody, you could beat them. You could stand out ahead of them right now with that right content, and it doesn't have to be big. It's like that. No one is going to be making content for VR right now that has like $100 million budget, right? Because no one knows enough to know what to do with it and know if you're going to recoup it, right? Absolutely. So it would be like crazy for anyone to spend that. But what that does is it leaves that time open. Like for the first time, there's cameras, and they're going like, here, people, go take pictures, because before you were just drawing, but the kid might take the better pictures than the guy who's the dean of the art school, of a major university. Like, it levels that playing field where the creative solution, the design solution coming in could make all the difference. And that to me makes it really, again, that's those moments. Right, those moments in history, and VR is certainly one right now where a few people might be able to make a dent early and just be out there in the stratosphere in no time.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, we got about 10 minutes before we got to record our next guest, so let's definitely talk about new and tasty. I mean, big video game companies are crashing down around us, and you guys are re-releasing your classic games in HD, and everybody's been screaming, where's Abe, and you guys decide to make a new game. Why do that when it's so damn risky?
Well, because in some ways it was the only thing we could really afford, and that's just the truth of it. We're looking at this audience who's going, give us more. And we're going, well, as I said, we have to self-finance, right? Because if you don't, you're into the acquisition game again, which means your IP is going to be owned by someone else eventually, right? So I'm oversimplifying. Someone could say, well, technically he's wrong on that. I'm not getting into all that bullshit, right? But that's the general nature of it. And so in self-financing, we figured out, what can we do? How do we get this restarted without having to borrow money to do it? And then all the strings that are attached to that. And so it started with those conversions and just bringing them from Xbox to PlayStation and PC. And we had some challenges, some successes and failures, but largely successes, of really supportive audience. And then that earned enough that it let us go, what should we do next? And the truth is, I wouldn't have thought, we should reinvest and redo Abe's Oddysee, like rebuild it from ground up. I'd be like, why? I don't think the audience knows the game. I don't think they'd really, I can't see taking that into a studio and getting funded, right? Yeah, even as someone funding ourselves potentially. I'm like, I don't know. I don't get it. So what we did was we started, we're in the connected age of community now, and so we've been trying to harness community and do a better job nurturing it and communicating with it and listening to it, most importantly. And they're just saying, dude, get us more games, man. Enough already. And we're like, well, we can't really afford it. We can't afford to build a new one. But maybe we could do some of this here's a poll, and we started polling. And we started saying, what if we built one of these 5 things? Which one would you most like to see? And out of that process came that they wanted to see Abe's Oddysee redone in like HD. And we were like, but that doesn't work, because it was 2D. It was a game that was really super designed by constraints of the day, and technical constraints. And so we said, well, what if we were more ambitious about that? And what if we did something that we don't really see people doing a lot of? What if we just really kept that original script? Like if it was the Time Machine, the movie, which was my favorite movie. If you just kept that original script and reshot it with 21st century technology, I'm in that line for that movie tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
But instead, you're going to rewrite it and give it to someone like Tim Burton to screw it up, And I'm like, what are you doing, And what's with all this song and dancing lately anyway with Tim Burton's films? But anyhow, another CalArts graduate, But so looking at that going, well, if Time Machine was rebaked with 21st century technology, but they kept that original script, a couple of changes here and there just to monitor, wouldn't that be cool? What would that be like? I would love that because that was a great story. And we said, well, what if we do that with the game? What if we keep the script? And what if we redo it all else? And then we're going to have a number of design problems to figure out how do we deal with all this subtle stuff, flip screen to continuous screen, the speed at which the user is encountering, the player is encountering enemies changes. All these things change, and it breaks all your puzzles, and everything is not, it gets seriously deconstructed and falls apart under new technology. So then how do we remedy that with all new design solutions that still stay true to the original feeling? And we said, well, if we can do that, do we think, people will dig it? And so we're polling the audience, and they're like, yeah, that would be great. We'll support you. We'll support you. So we said, well, we think we can afford it. And actually at the time we were pretty sure we could afford it. Then by the end of the project, we're like, maybe we can't, but because, over budget, over time, this typical game development realities. But we could afford it. And then as we got deeper into it, we're like, we think this can be really special. And ultimately it wound up being more than I thought it would be for the team that we had on it in terms of pure manpower. Maybe up to 30 people total, some contracted on and off throughout the duration of the project over a couple years. It's not just a couple guys coming up with a clever idea and making a simple indie game. It's bringing the same practices that we were doing at Oddworld when we were building AAA. We're just doing what we can with the money, but we're trying to bring the same excellence to it. And so far, we've got a really good response on that. And that's why I was spending the time in the UK, was to make sure that if we do this sort of novelty thing, which is keep the same script, keep the same essence of design, modernize it into the 21st century. If we do that and we do that well, will the audience respond? And that was the big if. And so far it's looking good, but we go on sale July 22nd, so we'll see.
Well, I'm lining up in front of my computer to get my copy.
Well, outstanding. Thank you. We'll light the candle for you.
Yeah, I don't have a PlayStation 3 or 4, but I got a PC, so
yeah.
Nice. Well, that'll be coming. I don't have the date yet, but it'll be coming soon.
Wonderful.
But PC version is pretty sweet if you got a halfway decent system. Well,
I can honestly say I have 2 original PlayStation copies of Abe, Oddysee, and Exoddus, and awesome. I also recently bought them both on Steam as well.
Oh, well, thank you for that. Every little bit helps. I feel like the Salvation Army. Like every dime helps, man. That's awesome. Thank you, sir. But it's actually really true. It's like when small developers had the opportunity to start selling their product and basically be the recipient of those sales receipts. Not like way down the ladder waiting for quarterly reports from some public company to see how your shaving took place. But you're the recipient of those original receipts. You're right on the front line of seeing what's coming in and moving through. It changed a lot of things, and people could actually start thinking more like a business. And quite frankly, as developers, I don't think we did a great job of thinking like a business. I think a lot of developers didn't do great jobs of thinking like a business because they think like developers. They want to build stuff. They're creators. They want to make things. But seeing, basically in real time if you're on Steam and various financial reporting back from other networks, depending on where they are, who they are in the world. But you get to actually have a whole different sense of the relationship to who your customer is. I mean, that's not even building MMO games or multiplayer games with forums and communities, clans. I mean, this is just still solid state games, but we get to learn a lot and see what we can do. And this gets back to, keep it lean, right? Because the overheads will kill you. So today, with Oddworld, we got a project up in Vancouver with Square One Games, who's releasing Stranger's Wrath HD mobile shortly. And I got to say, we spent a lot of time. Please check this out. You know what? Through Alex, let's get you guys free codes because I really want you to see this. Sure. We signed NVIDIA, Qualcomm, AM3D, all wanting to use it to demonstrate at their GPU conference because it's pushing the GL3 class rendering on the cell phones. So it looks amazing. And then we spent a lot of time with the orbital and the thumb controls to figure out, redesign the interface to actually make Stranger an enjoyable experience on the phone. And it actually is. Like, I played through the entire game of Stranger twice now on my iPhone, once on the Galaxy. And I just didn't think we would have done it, and I didn't think Square One made us a unique offer. That's their model, is bringing old classic games that they like, that developers own the IP on, and they approached the developers. They did it first with Brian Fargo with Bard's Tale.
Yeah.
And then they're doing it now with Stranger.
So you're releasing it on Android as well.
Yeah, so
you got to put it on the Ouya then.
Well, no, because Ouya requires that you have a free demo, and we don't want to do that.
Right.
And so it's like, no, guys, bad model, because the statistics prove if there's a free demo, even with a good game, now on these devices, the way it works is you reduce your sales. So why would you enforce that on your console for every content coming there that says you must have a free demo? You go, the statistics show you that is not working for a lot of people. However, not bitching, but I'm saying those statistics, they change every day, right? This is like analytic tracking.
Yeah.
But in general, no, we're not giving free demos because for whatever reason it taints your sales. And we believe in the product we build, and that it's worth it. We believe we're delivering very good value for the money. And even on the I think the cell phone version of Stranger HD is going to be like $4.99 or something up there, which is high price point for mobile. But you're actually buying that same game. It renders better on the iPhone 5 than it did on the Xbox.
Oh, that's amazing.
I'm amazed, right? And it plays, and there's no lag. And we figured out we figured out a combination of orbital and thumbs where actually the first-person shooter experience makes sense and is enjoyable.
That's awesome.
And we didn't think we could do that. Audience will ultimately determine if I'm correct or fooling myself, But I have no illusions there anymore, But
did you guys put the gamepad option into there?
Oh yeah, it's supporting. I'm not sure how many versions of gamepads. I mean, a lot, far more than I knew existed.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And it's like, I think compatible with 1,250 fragments of Android. Like actually 1,250 different devices and fragmentations and OSs of Android that it'll be compatible with.
Yeah.
These guys.
Corey's the iPhone guy. I have an Android, so.
I can imagine that discussion happening every next week.
I'm also the guy with 15 consoles. So.
Yeah.
Right. And what, Corey's PC or is
I'm Mr. PC. I'm the MMO guy, so.
Right.
Yeah, I'm right. Mr. Vintage Collectibles games, so it's just I got every console under the sun going.
You got a ColecoVision?
I don't. I know. You've brought up like 2 or 3 consoles during this conversation where I'm like, oh, I don't have a 3DO.
I should talk to my buddy Mark and see if he still has his Intellivision.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, the Intellivision. My dad worked at ColecoVision. He was a package designer, just fitting on the circuit boards and all. And then the other one I was thinking of was the Neo Geo. It was the Turbo Duo. No, not the Neo Geo. The Neo Geo was competing with the Turbo Duo by NEC, and that was a disk drive-driven system. Yeah. And that was the first disk-driven console system that I played where I actually heard real music. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. It's like a band.
Yeah.
instead of,
I do still have my original Atari, though.
Yeah, well, you got the collection, right? I mean, you're accumulating the museum there.
Well, geez. So what can you tell us about New and Tasty before we?
So New and Tasty, it's some people have been calling it, and I have to agree, it's a labor of love. The team at Jaw put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in on this. I think it was a lot harder than they anticipated in the beginning. It required a lot more design refinement, but we took that classic, and I believe, we had it at E3 in people's hands all week, and we didn't see anyone disappointed. A lot of people wanted to buy it right then. So I think, and a lot of those were Abe fans. So I think we're in a good spot. I try to be very realistically with this stuff, but we really pulled the plugs out. I mean, I went over there. I wasn't planning on it to help the team. It reminded me of the first Abe's Oddysee in that it had a lot of the same passion. Like there's a lot of things in this game that did not need to be there, just in the environmental artwork, in the ambience that's happening, and where you'll see any screen that you stop on and just look at, you'll notice the life that's happening deeper and deeper in all places. And these guys really, they didn't have to do that, but it was a labor of love, and they put it there. And then on a play level, we had to get it fast and fluid and rewarding and fun and hilarious. So one of the things that came out of this is it's much funnier than the original game. We were able to get all these voices in, like the original game had like hill, it was just me being pitch tone to do two different volumes, But then
are you still doing the voices in this one?
Well, a lot of them, like Abe and stuff, yes. The Gluckins, the Sligs, yes.
Great.
But what we did was, and it's 20 years later, right? So someone's going to be complaining, that doesn't sound like Abe. It's coming, I know it. I'm like, I'm sorry, guy, I'm 20 years older, But the thing that I think was really cool was what we did was we said, look, we can get more voices. Why don't we get the audience? Why don't we get fans to submit like little voice tests? And why don't we filter through that? And if we can get fans to be the voices of Mudokons in the game, how many can we get? And so we put that out there, right? And we got back some great submissions, some really terrible ones, but we had to. It took us a lot more money to like weed through the community submissions. Than it would have to contract voice talent, even if we hired it. I would have just done it myself. But so it wasn't like a cost-saving measure of taking advantage of talent. It was simply like, hey, wait a minute. What if we say to the fans, the people that have been loyal to us, supporting our products, encouraging us to keep on building more, hey, you want to be a Mudokon? Submit a voice. And if we pick you, then do all these voices, all these different variations for what the characters would say, and we'll get them in the game, and you get to say, I'm in the game. I did a voice one of those characters in those games. So I think we got 20 plus people like that, doing unique voices. But some of them are like rock stars. Some of them are celebrity actors and voice talent. That it was extremely surprising. And they were just fans that you'll recognize them. I don't want to have Alex beat me up for jumping or anything, but it was very surprising. So it's funnier because the characters sound different, and we got a lot more, just a lot more expressive samples in there. So that we're watching little kids play Abe right now, and when they're playing, he walks to a ledge and he's like, oh, oh, oh. He's doing these little expressions that show, and the kids are like, oh, oh, oh. Afraid he's going to fall, and you can watch them get hypnotized by what they believe is like a life form. And they're like, I want to play Abe again. I want to play. And we're getting this with like the guys that are on the project, the kids are watching them at home test the game, and the kids want to get involved, even the little kids, because I think it's because the characters have that sense of they're really in that world, and they really kind of feel alive for that world, not with RPG stats and all that stuff, but just in terms of watching. You're like, whoa, he's getting chased by those guys. That's pretty scary, and they look real. Anyway, so I think that what happens, what we noticed is the more people are watching it being played, the funnier it gets. So if like 10 people are watching, it just starts getting hilarious because it's an ultimate type of backseat driver game. It's like, your wife is playing, you're like, no, babe, no, you got to run and jump up there. She's like, shut up, stop telling me what and everyone's like, no, really, you might want to listen to him, but you should sneak over there. She's like, shut up, and then like, something lands, and and now we added Ragdoll. So something that I think made the Oddworld games a lot of fun was that you could really do be bad, right? You're supposed to save everyone, but you could really get everyone killed in various terrible ways, and that were hilarious, right? So now we were just playing around, just testing what the Ragdoll would do, and we were having, like, at E3 we were just doing it on the floor, and it was scenarios where, like, Abe gets shot, falls off a platform, hits his face on another platform, backflips down, lands on his knees below that, and he lands on his knees, and it looks like his hips impacted like into his whole torso area, and then gets shot and falls forward and face plants into a landmine. I mean, we're just like, it's hilarious. We're like, oh wow, and that's the beauty of physics, right?
Yeah.
You that really unpredictable things. So a lot of these things you'll just be playing. I mean, it's funny to see these guys get toasted and do those things anyway, get dusted in hilarious ways. I mean, you're really about saving guys in the most dangerous environment ever, right? Navigating them through this like totally lethal festival of death around you. And through the meat processing plant. But in doing it, it's fun when it fails. But the addition of the voices and the ragdoll physics, I think, really, really started to take those moments as they existed classically and just boost them into all kind of new funny possibilities where you're just cracking up. A guy gets shot and he's hanging from his toenail off a ledge and dangling. He's just this ridiculous stuff winds up emerging, and we love it. We love those things. So hopefully the audience will too, but I think there's a lot of laughs there. We were cracking up once it was running. Before that we were crying, right? As is always the case. But we were soaking it up. We loved it. I mean, we loved what it was adding, and we hope the audience loves it too.
The ragdoll physics in Postal 2. Just, I'd be sitting there kicking corpses around just to see how they're moving, right?
Exactly. You could do that now. You know how in Abe's games the slaves could beat Mudokons with their guns?
Yeah.
So if they're dead, you can beat characters. You can just knock them around and see where they end up. The ragdoll percent. Some funny stuff comes out of it.
God. Well, if I wasn't already sold, I am now.
Awesome. Hey, I really give you guys, I thank you guys for, giving us the opportunity to be on your show, reach your audience, talk about the game. We appreciate all the support we can get.
Absolutely. And thank you for responding on Twitter. That was kind of like a childhood fantasy right there.
Really, I tell you, it's so rare for me to respond on Twitter. It's like, incredible that it happened. Because it's just like Twitter completely overwhelms me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Like, it auto follows all your followers.
Yeah.
So it did that to me. Now it's like I don't even know how to keep track of it because I'm getting, I was just like, what are you guys doing at Twitter? Oh, sorry, we screwed up and we auto-followed all of your followers. But now you can spend 4 days and clean that up. Here's how. And they're like, no, that's not how it works. You screwed up. So I don't know. Twitter's been Twitter and I have not a cozy. All right, guys.
Well, before you go, let people know how they can follow you on Twitter and such social media.
Oh, okay. So I think I'm Lorne. What am I? What am I on Twitter? Well, my Facebook is where I usually do it. We do Oddworld on Twitter. So at Oddworld, at Lorne Lanning. I need some Twitter lessons to get better at that stuff. I always screw it up. I think it's private and it goes public, or whatever. It's like, I don't get it. But I need to spend some more time on it. So it's Lorne Lanning, at Lorne Lanning, and at Oddworld. And for PR, it's Alex Carroll at Oddworld. So alex.carroll, Carrol, at oddworld.com is his email for any of that. And Alex Carroll, I believe, is his Twitter as well. But I'm probably wrong about that. Sorry, Alex. Yeah, great plug, dude. Yeah, he gave him, probably just introduced some porn Twitter accounts. But and we go on sale, PSN, PS4 US in July 22nd. And so far, so good. So fingers crossed.
Excellent. Well, I wish you all the luck because I would love to see more from you guys.
Excellent. And of course, oddworld.com. If you just go to Oddworld, sign up, then you'll be alerted on all our stuff.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on, and hopefully we get a chance to talk to you again.
Thank you, Corey. Hey, and thanks, Miles.
Yeah, cheers.
Appreciate it, guys. All right. Take care.
So that was our chat with Lorne Lanning. It was a marathon, a lot of information to process, and
Yep.
I never expected that we'd be talking about the Reagan Star Wars project.
No, not at all. Wow, the guy worked for NASA.
What a strange and wonderful conversation that was. And I'd love to talk to him again, because if we had not had another guest coming on moments later that we had to push back,
Yeah.
I think we could have talked for another hour.
Yeah, I think so.
So we'll probably get him on to finish that up. If you're enjoying these conversations as much as we're enjoying doing them, please go give us a rating in iTunes or wherever you're catching your podcast. And you can also find us on Twitter. I'm at CTibbets.
I'm at @slam_tango.
And that's it for this week in End Credits. Until next week, roll end credits.